People in the Perth lockdown themselves, as we know, were still allowed to go for essential purposes. If they couldn't work from home, they could go into the office, they could get groceries. Those, though, that had happened to have flown to Queensland were placed in hotel quarantine. Joining me live now is Liberal Senator in Queensland, Gerard Rennick. Thanks for your time. What did you make of this particular move from the Queensland government and what it sort of does for movement around the country?
Well, look, it obviously makes it very difficult to move around the country if people are going to be locked down on a whim. I mean, I feel very sorry for those people that are on a plane on their way back, given that they'd left Perth probably before the lockdown even commenced that evening. I'm not sure why they couldn't have been allowed to, go home, get a test straight away, and if they tested positive. But look, I mean, it's a marginal call if you're going to play the lockdown game. Look, that one was a marginal call. It's hard to say what's right and what's wrong, but if we're going to continue to get out of COVID, I don't think we necessarily should be locking down every time there's one or two cases that get out of hotel quarantine. I mean, there's a lot of talk lately about hotel quarantine and that it's not working that well, but I would argue that there's only been a limited number of cases that have escaped quarantine out of the thousands of people that have gone through quarantine. So I would argue that it's worked pretty well. And that we just need to make sure we've got thorough contact tracing and testing to make sure that if it does escape, we pick it up early. OK. So what did you make of one of the responses from the WA Premier questioning why people were seemingly allowed to travel from Australia to a wedding in India and then return here? Should that be a priority right now? Look, I don't know the individual facts of that case. Look, it's not unusual for people to get exemptions to travel. Look, obviously, they should be tested before they come back home. And I heard his comments about saying, well, that's not working. Well, testing's not perfect. I think we all know that. And that's why we have quarantine. If testing was perfect, then we wouldn't need quarantine at all. So, no one ever got 100%, in their studies at school. So from time to time, there's going to be, people are going to fall through the cracks. The important thing is it was picked up early, and at this stage it seems to be contained. But just on priorities, so we've had a recent tightening of the reasons why people can leave, but is it a fair enough question to ask why, if at any stage people should be allowed to leave for a wedding? I get why it's an important event, of course, but for a wedding, while there are still Australians stuck overseas that can't return home, that appears to be the wrong priority. If someone in that wedding is travelling and then coming back in one of those, limited hotel quarantine spots. Yeah, look, that's not necessarily that's a fair point. I would point out that about 70,000 people, Australians, have returned home since October last year. We often hear this number that there's 40,000 people stuck overseas who can't get home. And then I heard that last October, and I've heard that again recently, despite the fact that 70,000 arrivals have happened. So but some must, Senator, I'm just going to jump in there because we've spoken to some on the program. I accept that. And you're right that a whole heap have come back, but others just haven't been able to. They can't afford the more expensive flights. And again, it's the limited spots in hotel quarantine when others are in Australia leaving and coming back seemingly for a wedding. Well, look, I would suspect that we've got a waiting list, and if you put your name on the waiting list, then, when your turn comes, you get the opportunity to take it. But look, unfortunately, if we want to protect people here in Australia... That's unfortunately not how it works, though, Senator, from all the people we've spoken to. You don't go, you're number 38,000 in the queue and you get in. It just hasn't been operating like that. That's the problem. Well, obviously it's been operating reasonably okay, or we wouldn't have been bringing in up to 6,000 people a week. So as I just said, we've had 70,000 people come back from overseas. I'm not saying the system's perfect, don't get me wrong, and I'm not saying that people are unfairly, there's not people that, who like to come home who, and it's not fair on them that they can't. But it's a question of, how many people we can quarantine here. I would point out that for a long time I would have argued that had we kept internal state borders open, we would have had a lot more room for international arrivals to be quarantining, which is why I think it's important to keep state borders open so that we don't have to put domestic travellers in quarantine, thus delaying the arrival or return of international travellers. But look, the system isn't perfect, Tom. It's changing every day, and unfortunately, some people have had to wait longer than others. And if it's a case of expensive tickets, then obviously, we could look at putting more flights on. I'm not sure of the reasons why we don't put more flights on. I've also spoken to people who said they had no problems getting home. So, look, I suspect there's a lot of individual different circumstances here, and we've got to take each case on its merits.